Hi, this is Scott Fish. Thanks for listening. This is the first part of a four-part interview with Jimmy Webb, recorded on February 28th, 1983. I've lifted one, maybe two snippets from this interview for my blog, but this is the first time the entire interview will be made available to the public. This was conducted at the Webb residence in Tuxedo Park, New York, and it was thanks mainly to Jim Keltner for arranging the interview. Jimmy Webb had just released in April 1982 his album Angel Heart, which I loved at the time it came out. I still love it. For drummers listening to this, Jeff Porcaro is the drummer on that entire album, and it's just fantastic songs. The whole thing, soup to nuts. It's Angel Heart is a very strong album, well worth listening to. As you listen to Jimmy, I remember at the time walking away feeling as if he was kind of unhappy with the way things were going in his career at this time, and he even says so in a couple of parts in this interview. The good news is that his career is still doing great. He remains one of the greatest songwriters of all time. As I said, this was 1983, February 28th. And I wanted to give the public an opportunity to hear this interview. Each interview segment is going to be 30 minutes long, give or take. Enjoy.
Testing. There we go. Get this all the way up. All right. Set this down here? You all right? Okay.
Am I close enough to?
Yeah, this thing picks up really well. It's pretty good. So, we're sitting around this morning kicking around some questions. One thing I was just curious about, is it recording?
Hello? I was just looking at the Sony Innovation.
What does it say?
It says it has a built-in electret condenser microphone.
Electret?
That's what it says.
Electret. Not quite electric. But, I don't know, I was just kind of curious. As far as like becoming a professional, was there like a time, can you pinpoint like a person or a place or like an incident that when you decided that you wanted to do this for a living, so to speak?
I think I was really forced by circumstances to become a songwriter professionally, because what I was really trying to do is major in music at San Bernardino Valley College.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was thinking more than anything else about a degree and maybe the opportunity to teach somewhere or something. I was very interested in choral music, and one of the strong influences on my life at that time was a choral conductor we had at San Bernardino Valley College named Otto Melins, and I guess his relationship with me and all his students was one of those. It bordered on awe, the feeling that we had for him.
Mm-hmm.
He was our prophet of music, really. And the other professor that I worked with in that same school, named Russell C. Baldwin, who just died recently, had been one of the great concert pianists, and potentially, I guess, a Van Cliburn, if you will.
Is that right? Yeah.
Until he had an automobile accident and it had damaged his hand. And then he went on to teach us harmony, and musicianship, and composition. And he was the other influence because he's the guy who told me that I was wasting my time in college.
Is that right?
Yeah. He called me into his office one day at the end of the semester and said, first of all, he said, I want to show you your grade on your semester final. Our semester final is an original composition. I had set a composition by Yeats.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of it, but it goes, when you are old and gray and full of sleep and sitting by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream. Like that. And I'd done this thing for choir. And he just threw the paper on the desk, and it was an A+. He said, if I could give you a higher grade, I would. He said, this is great composition. He said, on the other hand, here's your semester grade. And he gave my semester grade was a D. And he said, this is because you spend, too much time in the practice rooms writing songs, and you don't do your homework, and you don't do this, and you don't do that. And it seems to me like, he used to call me a bebopper when we'd do sight singing in class. And he would sing 3 pitches, and then he'd ask us to sing the 3 pitches. And he used to say that I slurred my way into every pitch. And he would say, don't bop, Mr. Webb, don't bop. So he was quite a character. He also used to say to me, are you recalcitrant again this morning, Mr. Webb? And I'd run back to my dorm and get out the dictionary and say, well, what does recalcitrant mean, actually?
What does it mean?
It means unprepared.
Ah.
And so, anyway, he said, I think you'd be better suited for this kind of dream that you have of being a songwriter than you are for college. And he said, why don't you just do it? Why don't you make the commitment and do it? He said, I think you'd be happy, and I know I'd be happier. So really, I think, strangely enough, it wasn't a pleasant discussion, but I think if I was looking for a key, the thing that pushed me over the edge, that was probably it. Mm-hmm. And immediately after that, I had been flirting with the idea anyway. I was taking the bus into Hollywood and visiting record companies mm-hmm. and so on and so forth. But after that, I hung it up, and I borrowed $1,000 from some friends of mine in Newport Beach, and I bought a Volkswagen, old second-hand Volkswagen, and I went to Hollywood. Really went to Hollywood and rented an apartment, and just started going around trying to get someone interested in the music.
Mm-hmm. So, how did you get from Oklahoma to? I mean, was your home life a lot of music too then?
Very strong religious background, church mm-hmm. background. My father was a Baptist minister for 22 years, till my mother died in 1964. Mm-hmm. She always wanted me to accompany my father, and we would go out for revival meetings and things like that. And so she started me on piano when I was about 6 years old. Mm-hmm. And it really didn't take at first. But when I was 12, 13, I started getting really interested in the piano. Mm-hmm. I think there's something interesting about that, is that you'll hear people say, and I've had teachers tell me about my own kids, well, I don't think this kid has an affinity for music. Mm-hmm. I don't think he has his father's gift. And all that stuff. But I didn't have any kind of a gift. I mean, I wasn't even slightly interested in playing the piano, and certainly there were no outward signs of any ability at all.
At 5, like Mozart?
Until I was around 12.
Yeah.
And then it seemed like somewhere it had stuck in there, you know, all that information was actually still there. And it came out, you know, seemingly almost all at once. And became very interested in it. And of course, this was in Oklahoma. And then my family moved to California when I was 17.
Oh, they did? Okay.
And to Colton, California. And I graduated Colton High School, and that year my mother died. And my dad went back to Oklahoma, took the family and went back, and there I was trying to finish, to get a degree at, I was going to finish my 2 years at SBVC and then go on somewhere else. And probably all I really thought about doing was educating, teaching maybe, or, you know.
So how far did you get? Just got like junior year? Or?
It was my second year.
Yeah.
I quit halfway through my second year, and that's when I had the meeting with Mr. Baldwin.
You sound like a pretty sharp guy. Pretty
He was a great guy.
And then I was talking to Hal Blaine. He said he was worked with you a lot then, right? On some of the early,
Yeah.
Hal and that crew.
Well, I had, after I moved in there, one of the first things I did is I had been in and out of Motown offices off and on.
Is that, yeah? Well,
because I was really crazy about a record that they had made called Baby, I Need Your Lovin'. And I thought, well, that's the kind of record I want to make. You know, I really loved it. And so I took my stuff in there, and I was surprised, I guess, because they were so black-oriented and everything. But they were interested in my stuff, and the first commercial recording I ever had was on a Supreme's Christmas album. It was called My Christmas Tree, which I think is a brilliant, unique title for a Christmas song. And they recorded it, and I used to do odds and ends for them. I do lead sheets. I would write a song for Billy Eckstine. I would work with Frank Wilson on a song for Billy Eckstine. Brenda Holloway I worked with. While I was there, I got my first chance to arrange. And there was an old studio just in the shadow of this Los Angeles Federal Savings and Loan. It was this huge building in the corner of Sunset and Vine. And just behind it, almost, in the shadow, it was this old building called Bob Ross Music Service. There was a great gentleman there named Bob Ross, who in future years he became almost indispensable to me. And the first arranging I ever did was in that little studio. It was just a little clapboard house. And there were three girls that I'd gone to college with called the Contessas. They call themselves the Contessas. And we did 2 songs with them and 2 songs with a guy named Don Ray Sampson. And I copied all the parts out in pencil. And I remember that all the instruments were in concert because I did not trust my transposing abilities. So when I picked the instruments, I just picked all concert instruments. I picked trombones and vibes and flutes and violins and things like that. Nothing that I had to transpose. And one of the guys on the date was Hal Blaine. And he came in very witty and very professional and did his job. And I think that was one of the most incredible moments in my life, really, was when the first time I heard a playback of an arrangement I had done, and I heard the strings, and it all sounded okay. I mean, it really sounded okay. And after the session, I remember that Hal sort of waved me over to the drums. He was sitting behind the drums. And he said, "Hey," he said, "so you did all this by yourself, huh?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you ever do it before?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, listen," he said, "you really ought to stick with this." He said, "You really did a good job." He said, "I says, just try to stick with it, you know." And kind of laughed and walked out. But he subsequently became, you know, a really heavy influence on me, in the sense that he always encouraged me. He was there on a lot of important records for me, Up and Away and MacArthur Park, and he was always there with a wink and with some kind of a funny remark when things were really uptight and when I maybe, you know, was faltering a little with my self-confidence or whatever. He was always there, and he was always like a father and then a brother and a real mentor. There's no way that probably any of it would have happened without him.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they were doing those as the songwriter, and did you arrange Up and Away too?
I did the rhythm tracks.
Yeah.
Marty Page did the strings and horns.
And now when they were recording that, were you required to be in the studio too while all that was going down?
Oh yeah. Well, that, you know, I started out as with the Fifth Dimension when they were called the Versatiles. And basically I was just a rehearsal pianist. I sat with them and played the piano and helped them with vocal arrangements. And in fact, you know, we were all working for Johnny Rivers. He was in San Remo at the International Song Festival doing something, and he just left me with this group and said, when I get back, we want to do this album and stuff. And in the meantime, somehow they changed their name to the Fifth Dimension, and I brought in this song called Up and Away, and they all liked it. And Rivers said, "Well, that's got to be the album title." He thought that was a great album title. You know, one thing led to another. But when they finally got in the studio, I more or less still went in as their piano player and as kind of their, you know, assistant to their vocal arrangements and stuff. And I just, you know, suddenly found myself in the studio. I was never a songwriter who wrote a song and took it into the studio. Excuse my earthquake here. I've always been in the studio. I feel like I was born in the studio. So I've always. I remember when Glenn Campbell recorded Wichita Lineman, that he heard me up at the house one night fooling around with this Gulbranson organ that I had. It was one of those fancy organs with all this. This is before synthesizers, folks. You know? And it had all these funny bells and things on it, and it had this kind of vibraphone stop or I don't know. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a repetitive note that repeated in a kind of sustain, and I was fooling around with it. It had a very electronic, strange sound. He said, "Why don't you bring that down to the studio?" So we loaded up the organ and we took it down to the studio. And you can still hear the Gulbranson on the intro to Wichita Lineman. Kind of strange electronic sound that sounds like, you know, some kind of equipment or something, electronic equipment. And that's the way it was for me. I just almost, I'm fortunate because people never try to keep me out of the studio. I was in the studio the night that Johnny Rivers recorded By the Time I Get to Phoenix with Lou Adler, and met Larry Nectar and Joe and Hal and all that crew, and that's just the way it was from then on. I was just a studio kid, and
He was about 19, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was doing all that stuff, and, you know, I felt like a real, you know, greenhorn, you know, and didn't really feel like all the time that I knew what I was doing, you know. I knew what I wanted to hear. That there was another little kid who was hanging around the studio all the time. And, but this was really a little kid. I mean, he was a little kid, you know, he was about 12 years old, maybe, pre-teen, you know. And I said, finally, because we were working with Marty all the time, and Marty was another one of the guys who really took care of me and wanted me to do well and would, you know, tell me about string parts and tell me how to do things. And one night I asked Armin Steiner, I said, who's the little kid who's always hanging around? He said, oh, that's Marty's son. That's David. Wow. I said, oh, yeah? And, I mean, he was just there all the time. I mean, he was there through Up, Up, and Away, and as I recall, you know, some of the other things. Mm-hmm. But definitely all the way through the Up, Up, and Away album. I don't know. It's still incredible to me that
chain of events.
The chain of events. Yeah, I don't know how it is. It just seems like that. Now I'm sure that there's some kid hanging around the Toto sessions, you know, and probably, you know, no one thinks too much of it, but one of these days it'll be his turn.
Right. I thought it was interesting. I was reading that thing that was in about Rolling Stone not too long ago. Steve Holden did an interview or a piece.
Yeah.
And where you made the comment, he asked you something about someone left the cake out in the rain or something, and you said, I hardly even remember the guy that wrote those tunes, or something to that effect. I don't know if that's an exact quote or not, you know?
Yeah, that's fairly accurate. I mean, a lot has happened since then, but besides that, I was just really, I was in a very formative stage. And it's not like I had lived such a sophisticated life up until that point. I wasn't a street kid. I wasn't somebody who grew up in the city and was really hip, you know, and knew everything that was going on. I basically always been either on the farm or in a very small town or in the church with my father, with my mother, doing some religious music or something, and then school, and then Hollywood. So I wasn't that mature. It's probably not as mature as most kids are when they're 17 and 18 years old. I was a virgin, I can tell you that for sure.
If someone was doing that today or kind of going the same route that you were going, would there be anything that you would tell them, like caution them on, or, you know?
Well, I could. I mean, I don't think it would do a bit of good, because I think that when you're that age that you have to do what you have to do, and that's what you're going to do, and nobody can really tell you. I know I can say what I should have done was take my career a little more seriously and think a little bit before I made some of the decisions I made. Just, you know, apply a little judgment to my actions. That's easy to do when you're 35 years old. It's not easy to do when you're 17 years old. Some kids can do it, some can't. It's just, you know, I made a lot of mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes I made was I just assumed that, you know, I had the magic formula, and anytime I wrote a song, it was going to be a hit.
Did you always feel that way?
Which is a very naive thing to do, but that's what I did. Once the first, you know, 3 or 4 things that I'd written were so successful that I thought, well, you know, this is it. It's the second coming, and I'm it. Obviously, I found out in short order that that's not the way things were. But before I found out, I had made some pretty, bad mistakes in the way I worked with the other people, the assumptions I made. I think just to simplify, I would have just worked harder. I would have just worked so much harder if I had known the real. There was a certain air of unreality around the whole music business in those days anyway.
Yeah.
There was so much money, and there was so much success, and there was the record companies were so willing to spend money on almost any kind of a project or idea, because they didn't know either. They didn't know exactly how serious you had to be to really be successful. They really didn't know how hard you had to work to be successful. They found out too. But in a way, it was all a kind of offhand, casual, atmosphere, way of working. So I didn't take it very seriously, I guess. I was just having a good time, and I did have a good time.
When did you decide that you wanted to get into performing, and as opposed to being the songwriter?
Well, in the early 70s, I was very conscious of the polarization of the whole music business, of the fact that it had basically split into two parts, and that there was a socially responsive and politically sensitive part of the music business that dealt with issues and what I used to call the buckskin jacket set,
Right.
and the people who played concerts for huge masses of people outdoors, and it's not exactly protest. I'm not talking about protest music. I'm just talking about socially responsible music that seemed to deal with the issues that we were faced, and there were some important ones. There was the war. And I realized that was one side of the music business. The other side that basically I saw myself as being associated with, was a more, purely entertaining form of music, in that as a songwriter for the Fifth Dimension, or Glenn or Richard Harris, that my horizon was limited as an artist, that I really did want to deal with some more serious issues in my own music. I wanted to be thought of differently. I didn't want to be thought of as someone who wrote popcorn music. No matter how successful I was, no matter how much money I made. And I made a conscious decision to stop it, to stop doing it, and to do something else. There's no doubt in my mind that I turned my back on a lot of money when I did that. I think I could have gone on doing what I was doing forever. But what I did was I made the Words and Music album for Warner Brothers, and got a 4-piece band together, and I went out and I did bus tours and played places like the Bitter End and
the Main Point
and Cellar Door. Did that old circuit, did the Troubadour several times, and started trying to, sort of chop out a little niche of my own as a, quote, serious artist, singer-songwriter. And this was just simply a reaction against being pigeonholed as a writer of pop tunes. I resented that and I reacted to it. And what happened is that I didn't gain a lot of acceptance as a singer-songwriter.
From an audience or from the industry?
I don't know. From the people I played for, I always felt like I got a good reaction. I think there was, always a little resistance to me doing this. I mean,
like Randy Newman.
I can't blame any. I'm not putting the blame on anybody. I started out with probably not the most well-developed skills. I improved as I went on. My albums got better and better, but seemingly I could never get past that initial change up from being pop songwriter to performer. I think it caused a kind of a backlash when people would hear profanity in my lyrics or some kind of outrageous, social statement of some kind in my lyrics and say, well, what's he trying to do? Who does he think he is? Why doesn't he just go out and write a beautiful song? I mean, that's the way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I just think there was a lot of resistance for probably many, many reasons, some which I probably don't even know. But it was never easy. It was never did seem to be any natural flow of energy. It was always an uphill battle.
Who was in the band with you?
Fred Tackett, drummer named Ray Rich, and myself, and a bass player named Skip Mosier. And it still isn't easy. I mean, the album that I just did for Columbia, I know, is the best album that I ever made. But by the time, I can say this, by the time as my potentiality improved and my chops improved, and my concept of what I wanted to do improved, really. Because I started out kind of flailing in the darkness, and as it became clearer to me what I want to do, who I was, the possibilities for success were declining because of tightening playlists and the general malaise of the recording industry worsened. And even though my albums got better, the chances of getting a hit worsened. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, but a lot of other people were still doing your stuff too. Hits, right?
Well, I've always had songs recorded by people on their albums, thank God. And every once in a while, some kind of a fluke comes through, like a #1 record with Donna Summer on MacArthur Park.
Right.
I have realized that to really stick around in this business as a songwriter, you have to put the idea of writing hit songs out of your mind.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. You have to write songs. You have to write good songs. And then you have to match those songs with artists who have the capability of making them come alive and making them breathe and giving them life. And then if that turns out to be an album cut, fine. And if the album turns out to be a hit, fine. You make money and you stay in the business. But and then once in a while, maybe you get a hit, and that's a good thing. But you have to learn